Hey guys, welcome to devlog point 37 for my indie shooter, Giovanni Goes to Pizza. In this video I wanted to go over how I turned my game from feeling terrible to play to feeling moderately acceptable for a low price indie game. If we take a look at what gameplay looked like from about 5 months ago, you may notice that the game looks pretty stiff. The animations are slow and awkward, the gunplay lacked impact, and overall there was a lack of game feel.
Dude, this game sucks.
So the first thing I started working on improving was the gunplay. More specifically, the recoil animations. Now the way I've been doing these animations is through code that lerps the gun between two positions. The nice thing about this is that it's convenient. It's a lot faster to type in a couple numbers than it is to make real shooting animations in Blender. But one downside to this method is that it doesn't look good. So instead of just lerping the position of the gun, I also lerp its rotation too. But with the addition of some randomness to the position and rotation, it starts to look pretty good. But the shooting still lacked impact, and that was because there wasn't enough camera shake. Now the game 5 months ago had camera shake, but I must have been drunk when I made it because this is what it looked like. So an increase in the camera shake, it was just too chaotic and would give me a mild headache. And the reason it was all jerky was because I was just generating random numbers to rotate the camera, which isn't ideal. But after doing a bit of research on the subject, I found that a lot of people sample Perlin noise in order to get smooth camera shake. And the reason this works so well is because Perlin noise is random, but also has smooth transitions between values. So if we move a sample point along the noise, we will get a value that gradually changes in the range of 0 and 1. Using a bit of math, we can adjust these values to something more ideal, and then apply them to the camera's rotation. And just like that, we have pretty decent looking camera shake. Once I was happy with the shooting, I moved on to first person animations. The animations featured in my last video were done quickly, since I was still experimenting with how to make catching weapons look good. So once I had that figured out, I remade all the animations in Blender and actually tried to make them look good. Now I'm not much of an animator, but I use this technique that I like to call have things animate fast enough so you can't see how terrible they actually look. And with this approach, I think they turned out pretty well. I also added camera shake on top of certain animations, like for when the magnet turns on or when throwing something, which just adds a lot more impact to those actions. So after adding better gunplay, camera shake, and animations, the game felt better to play, but another element was still missing. Camera animations. Not to be confused with camera shake. Camera animations are different. It's not always super noticeable, but a lot of FPS games use subtle camera movements when the player is sprinting, jumping, landing, or vaulting to help the player feel more grounded in the game world, as opposed to feeling like your guy is ice skating around on his ass. So I made a handful of very simple camera animations for when the player is running, jumping, and landing. I also made an animation for when catching something, so it feels like the thing you're catching has some momentum behind it. And while these animations are not really noticeable when playing, I think subconsciously the game feels a lot better with them than without them. But even with all these changes, the game still wasn't good enough. And the reason was because the player controller was a bit stiff, lacked refinement, and sucked ass. The biggest problem with the controller was momentum. You could wall run to build up speed, but as soon as you jumped off and hit the ground, all your speed was gone. Which I programmed intentionally, since having the player keep their speed would cause weird movements due to the design of the player controller. I think it's worth mentioning that the player movement isn't physics based, so all the forces acting on the player is written by myself, a dumbass, which is why the movement glitches exist in the first place. And the reason for not using Unity's physics engine is because simulating realistic physics for player movement doesn't always feel the best. I'm sure with enough work though, a physics-based controller can feel tight and responsive, but I just prefer not to go down that path. And even though the game isn't about high mobility like how it is in Titanfall, get to the fucking door in BUGSNAX, I still want there to be some sense of speed and momentum to the movement. So I ended up completely rewriting the player controller, and I was able to find a much better and simpler way of handling things. I don't really want to go into detail on how it all works because I'm getting tired of writing this script, but I will say it feels much better than the old one. And while making the new one, I also added sliding because one guy in the comments said to. I also tried to make the UI a bit more interesting and functional. Both the crosshair and hit markers are now animated, which makes shooting and landing shots a lot more satisfying. But the biggest change was to how the weapon targeting system works. Originally, the system would locate the closest weapon that the player was looking at and highlight it in red to communicate that was the thing you would pull. The red highlight didn't end up working well since from a distance you couldn't really see it, so I replaced the highlight with a UI element which has a fixed screen size so distance from the weapon doesn't matter. One issue I found with this though is when shooting enemies, the combination of the target marker, crosshair, and hit markers made the UI look like a mess. So now by default the targeting is turned off, but holding the right mouse button enables it. Once the weapon you want is selected, releasing the right mouse button will pull it towards you. Alternatively, just clicking the right mouse button will quickly grab the weapon that's in front of you. The new controls took some time to get used to, but ultimately I think I like this new method better. And if you have any thoughts on the new targeting system, or ways at which it can be improved, feel free to leave a comment. But that's about all I wanted to talk about for this video, so see ya.